Nicknamed the father of rock and roll, Chuck Berry was legendary with his music. He was a guru with the guitar, to say the least, but the man had his own very scandalous ways of life. Following his death, his children would confirm some shocking rumors that left the world jaw dropped. Watch this video to find out more about these disclosed rumors and how his UNC behavior almost got him in bigger trouble. But before getting into those details, we need to uncover the early life of Chuck Berry to see what shaped the icon. Early life. Charles Edward Anderson Berry, alias Chuck Berry, was born on the 18th of October, 1926, in St. Louis, Missouri, as the last born in the family. Chuck Berry grew up in the Ville, which is a neighborhood on the north side of St. Louis. His father was known as William Henry Berry, who was a deacon at a local Baptist church and a contractor. His mother's name was Martha Bell Banks, and she was a certified public school principal. Chuck Berry would get the opportunity to pursue his interest in music when he was still very young, thanks to his upbringing. While Chuck Berry was still a student at Sumner High School, he managed to do his first performance in 1941. However, when he was still a student at Sumner High School, he was also arrested for stealing a car at gunpoint together with his friends and also robbing 3 stores in Kansas City, Missouri in 1944. In Chuck Berry's defense, his car had broken down, and as a law-abiding and very good citizen who would not harm a fly, he decided to flag down a passing car at gunpoint with a non-functional pistol. Due to this, Chuck Berry was convicted and sent to the Intermediate Reformatory for Young Men, which is now called the Algoa Correctional Center in Jefferson City, Missouri. While at the Intermediate Reformatory for Young Men, Chuck Berry formed a singing group and also engaged in the sport of boxing. When Chuck Berry turned 21 in 1947, the law decided to give him a birthday present by releasing him from prison. As a man who had already learned his lesson and changed enough to focus on his life, he decided that it was time for him to get married. So, on the 28th of October, 1948, Chuck Berry got married to a woman by the name of Themeta Toddy Suggs. 2 years into their marriage, Toddy and Berry were blessed with a beautiful daughter who was born on the 3rd of October, 1950, and she was called Darlin Ingrid Berry. Chuck Berry knew that it was time to be more serious, and as a man, he had to feed his family. As a result, Chuck Berry would get a job at 2 automobile assembly plants, where he worked as a factory laborer before becoming a janitor at the apartment that his family was living in. Later on, Chuck Berry would attend the Poro College of Cosmetology, which was founded by Madam C.J. Walker, where Chuck Berry trained as a beautician. His hard work would finally pay off, and by 1950, Chuck Berry bought a small 3-room brick cottage with a bath on Whittier Street for his family to move in and have a place to call home. This house is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the Chuck Berry House. Chuck Berry would increase his efforts to have an extra source of income by the early 1950s, as he worked together with some of the local bands and performed at local nightclubs in St. Louis. Since his teenage years, Chuck Berry had been doing blues, and his guitar riffs and showmanship techniques were all borrowed from T-Bone Walker, the blues musician. His friend Ira Harris also gave him some guitar lessons, laying the foundation for Chuck Berry's guitar style. By 1953, Chuck Berry was already performing with the Johnny Johnson Trio, with whom he had a long-term collaboration. This group played ballads, blues music, and even country music. Chuck Berry would talk about this, writing, "Curiosity provoked me to lay a lot of our country stuff on our predominantly Black audience, and some of our Black audience began whispering, 'Who is that Black hillbilly at the Cosmo?' After they laughed at me a few times, they began requesting the hillbilly stuff and enjoyed dancing to it." Together with the group known as Joe Alexander and the Cubans, Chuck Berry recorded the songs "Oh Maria" and "I Hope These Words Will Find You Well" in 1954. These 2 songs were released as a single on the record label of Joe Alexander and the Cubans. The showmanship and the mix of R&B and country tunes that Chuck Berry used in the style of Nat King Cole, set to the music of Muddy Waters, brought in a large audience, most of whom were affluent white people. When Chuck Berry met Muddy Waters in May 1955 in Chicago, his life changed. Muddy told Chuck to meet with the co-founder of Chess Records, Leonard Chess, who became a big fan of Chuck Berry's take on Ida Red. Chuck Berry got the chance to do an adaptation of Ida Red under the name of Maybelline on the 21st of May, 1955. The song Maybelline was so successful that it topped the Billboard R&B charts, sold over 1 million copies, and hit position 5 on the Billboard Bestsellers in Stores chart on the 10th of September, 1955. Speaking about the success of Maybelline, Chuck Berry would say, "It came out at the right time when Afro-American music was spilling over into the mainstream pop." The track had other individuals who were also given credit on the song, meaning they were entitled to royalties. After Chuck Berry contested this in court, he won the case and became the only person entitled to the song's royalties. He also did a song that got on the charts known as Roll Over Beethoven before he went on tour as part of the top acts of 56. Meeting with Carl Perkins on this tour, Carl Perkins said the following about Chuck Berry's music. "I knew when I first heard Chuck that he'd been affected by country music. I respected his writing. His records were very, very great." He appeared in the rock and roll movies Rock, Rock, Rock in 1956 and Go Johnny Go in 1959. By the end of the 1950s, Chuck Berry was already an established superstar, cementing his name in the music scene and having appeared in films. He was getting in the money and decided to invest in real estate and open a nightclub in St. Louis known as Berry's Club Bandstand. This led him to prison after he was romantically involved with a minor he had brought to his club, who was a hat check girl. He was released from prison in 1963, and luck was on his side as the British invasion had taken over the waves with the likes of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, who were huge fans of his work as they had even reworked some of his songs. Later on, he returned to Chess Records and did a live recording of a novelty song titled My Ding-a-Ling, which became a #1 hit single. His last studio record was titled Rocket, which he did at Atco Records, and he waited 38 years before doing the next one. Tragedies and controversies. The mischief and misfortunes of Chuck Berry started when he was still a very young boy. One day, Chuck Berry, together with his friends, got into a stolen vehicle and went on a joyride. While they were at it, they encountered the police. While in prison, Chuck Berry decided to form a musical quartet with some of his fellow convicts. With this new group of inmate musicians, Chuck Berry would sing at the reformatory church services. This group of inmates was so impressive that they even got the opportunity to sing outside the confines of the prison. Chuck Berry spent only 3 years in the intermediate reformatory for young men before being released on good behavior. At one time in his life, Chuck Berry had a club business with pleasure and had his way with a waitress. As much as it is not wrong for two people to get involved romantically, this waitress was a 14-year-old girl, and so Chuck Berry was in trouble. His actions handed him his second prison sentence. This time he was given 5 years behind bars because he was charged with violating what was known as the Mann Act, originally known as the United States White Slave Traffic Act of 1910. After doing an appeal, this sentence was reduced. In the 1970s, Chuck Berry would instruct the places where he performed that he wanted to be paid in cash. As a result, he always had a huge load of cash with him and did not necessarily pay any taxes to the government. The failure to pay taxes landed Chuck Berry in even more trouble. When he thought he was doing himself a favor by avoiding taxes, the IRS came knocking on his door, and Chuck Berry was now facing a 3rd term behind bars. In 1987, Chuck Berry assaulted a woman at New York's Gramercy Park Hotel. When Chuck Berry was arraigned in court, he decided to plead guilty and was asked to pay a fine of $250. In 1990, Chuck Berry found himself in trouble with the law again. This time, several women came forward, claiming that Chuck Berry had installed a video camera in the bathroom of his own restaurant. In his defense, Chuck Berry claimed that he had installed the video camera because there was theft.